Adolescent female, 17. Voluntary statement contradicts involuntary hold criteria. Speech organized. Thought content. Here's where I stopped writing. Hillcrest County Behavioral Health. Crisis Stabilization Unit. 6 beds, 1 seclusion room with a window that faced a brick wall, and a nursing station behind scratched plexiglass that hadn't been replaced since the 90s. The whole place smelled like industrial floor cleaner. The lemon kind that doesn't smell like lemons. Underneath that, something older. Sweat and medication and recycled air. I was doing forensic evaluations there in 2011. The county had restructured, cut crisis beds by 40%, and every psychiatrist in the system was doing double duty in spaces that weren't designed for it. Interview room 2 was a repurposed group therapy room. Folding chairs, a whiteboard still covered in someone's coping strategies. BRHE in blue marker with a smiley face that wouldn't come off. The fluorescent light took 4 minutes to warm up. I used to sit in the dim for those 4 minutes, reviewing intake packets, waiting for the buzzing to settle. The buzzer system had 3 tones. Short pulse for the front entrance, 2 pulses for the staff door, long continuous tone for seclusion. You learn to identify them without thinking, the way you learn the sounds of your own house at night. Elise Calloway came in on a Tuesday in October. Police transport. Found walking barefoot on the median of Highway 7 at 2 in the morning. The officer's narrative was standard. Possible psychotic break, 72-hour emergency hold recommended. I'd read 1,000 of these. Subject appeared disoriented. Subject was unable or unwilling to provide coherent responses. I read the intake packet twice. The triage nurse had noted something in the margin. Patient cooperative and articulate. Requesting evaluation by name, Dr. Keene. Crisis admissions don't request evaluators. Most of them don't know what an evaluator is. But I was the only forensic psychiatrist on rotation, and I assumed the triage nurse had mentioned my name during intake. I walked into interview room 2 at 9:14 a.m. Elise was sitting in a folding chair, hands in her lap, composed. Brown hair pulled back, standard issue scrub top over her own jeans. She had a leather-bound journal on the table in front of her. Not a notebook, a journal, the kind with a magnetic clasp and lined pages. Dr. Keene, she said. Not a question. Good morning, Elise. I'm going to be conducting your psychiatric evaluation today. Before we start, I know the procedure. I consent to the evaluation. I'm oriented to person, place, time, and situation. My name is Elise Calloway. I'm at Hillcrest County Behavioral Health. Today is Tuesday, October 11th, 2011. I was brought here on an involuntary hold because I was walking on Highway 7 and the officers couldn't determine if I was a danger to myself. I set my pen down. In 22 years of practice, I had never had a patient recite their own orientation status before I asked. Speech organized, no tangentiality, no loose associations. Eye contact direct and sustained. Affect was appropriate. That was the problem. Can you tell me what you were doing on Highway 7? Walking. At 2 in the morning, barefoot, yes. Where were you going? She looked at the journal on the table, placed one hand on it. I needed to be here by Tuesday. This was the fastest way to make that happen. You wanted to be admitted? I needed to be evaluated by you on this date. She paused. You're going to want to read page 43, not yet, Thursday. I made a note. Patient demonstrates organized but unusual thought content. Possible delusion of reference. Assess for grandiosity. But even as I wrote it, the clinical language felt wrong. Delusions of reference are messy. Grandiosity is loud. Elise was neither. She was sitting in a folding chair in a borrowed scrub top, telling me to read a specific page of her journal on a specific day, with the same calm tone you'd use to tell someone to pick up milk on the way home. I asked about the journal. She said she'd had it for 3 months. She said she wrote in it every day. She would not let me examine it. She held it against her chest when I reached for it. The only moment in the entire evaluation where her composure shifted. "Not yet," she said again. "Thursday." I completed the MSE. No hallucinations reported. No suicidal ideation. No homicidal ideation. Cognitive function grossly intact. I diagnosed provisional adjustment disorder with mixed disturbance of emotions and conduct. Recommended continued observation. And walked out of interview room 2 feeling like I had just evaluated someone who was better at my job than I was. The fluorescent light buzzed behind me as the door closed. 3 tones on the buzzer, staff door. I remember thinking I should have asked her how she knew my name. I didn't. I didn't think about Elise Calloway for the rest of Tuesday. 3 other evaluations, a treatment team meeting, a phone conference with the county attorney's office. The crisis unit ran the way it always ran, understaffed, everything held together by nurses who deserved better pay and a buzzer system that never stopped. Wednesday morning, staff break room. I was pouring coffee from a pot that had been sitting since the night shift when Nurse Deborah Koss sat down across from me. Deborah had been at Hillcrest for 15 years. Nothing rattled her. So when she said, "That girl in room 4 is freaking me out," I paid attention. "Calloway?" She told me yesterday that a new admission was coming in today. Male, 34, blue jacket. She said he'd argue with me about his shoelaces during intake. I stirred my coffee. Patients talk. They overhear things from staff, from other patients. Dr. Keene. The admission came in 40 minutes ago. Male, 34, blue jacket. I took his shoelaces during intake protocol, and he argued with me about it for 5 minutes. She set her coffee down. She told me this yesterday, word for word. I pulled Elise's chart. Nursing notes from the overnight shift. No behavioral concerns, no sleep disturbance. The overnight nurse noted Elise was writing in her journal at 3 a.m. but was cooperative when redirected. Vitals normal. I went to room 4. Elise was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the journal open on her lap. She looked up when I knocked on the doorframe. "Wednesday," she said. "Code white, day room, 2:14 p.m., room 3. I wrote it down, not because I believed her, because documenting unusual patient statements is what you do. You write it down, you note the time, you move on. At 2:14 p.m., the patient in room 3 stood up in the day room and threw a chair at the television. Code white. 3 staff responded, over in 6 minutes. I stood in the hallway, listening to the debrief through the door, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 22 years. I felt clinically uncertain, not about a diagnosis, about what was possible. Thursday morning. I didn't sleep Wednesday night. I kept thinking about page 43. I told myself I was being ridiculous, a board-certified forensic psychiatrist responding to the suggestive statements of a teenager on an involuntary hold. Confirmation bias. The code white was a coincidence. People predict things. Sometimes they're right. I conducted a routine room check at 8 a.m. When I got to room 4, Elise was asleep. The journal was on the bedside table. I picked it up. I want to be clear, taking a patient's personal belongings during a room check is within protocol if there's a clinical justification. I told myself there was one. I opened the journal, small, meticulous handwriting, each entry dated. I flipped backward. Monday, October 10th, Tuesday, October 11th, Wednesday, October 12th, all filled in. I flipped forward. Thursday, October 13th, also filled in. Thursday's entry, I read it 3 times. The first time because I didn't understand it, the second time because I did, the third time because I needed to make sure I hadn't misread it. The entry described a psychiatric evaluation. The setting was Hillcrest County Behavioral Health, Interview Room 2. The evaluator was Dr. Maria Soto. I knew Maria Soto. She'd been my resident in 2004, bright, meticulous. She was now on staff at a facility in Rochester. The patient being evaluated was Harold Keene, me. The entry listed symptoms: date-checking compulsion, approximately 8 months, sleep onset insomnia, worsening over 6 months, persistent derealization, episodic, intrusive thought content regarding temporal displacement. I set the journal down on Elise's bedside table. My hands were steady. I want that on record. My hands were steady. Every symptom was accurate. I had been checking the date on my phone compulsively for months. I hadn't slept through a full night since spring. There were moments during evaluations when the room would feel thin, like the walls were painted on a scrim, and the thoughts about time. 3 months earlier, a patient asked me what year it was, and I couldn't answer for 4 seconds. I hadn't told anyone, not my wife, not my own therapist, not a colleague. These symptoms existed only inside my head. You know what I did? I went back to interview room 2. I sat in the folding chair. I waited for the fluorescent to warm up, and I wrote a progress note on Elise Calloway that said, "Patient resting comfortably, continue observation." Because that's what you do. You write it down, you note the time, you move on. Except I couldn't move on, because page 43 also included a date for my evaluation, not October 13th, not this week. It was dated March 2012, 5 months from now, and the referral source listed was self-presentation. I was going to walk into this facility and ask to be evaluated, according to a 17-year-old's journal, by my own former resident. The buzzer sounded. 2 pulses. Staff door. I flinched. I'd never flinched at the buzzer before. I went back to room 4 that afternoon. Elise was sitting on the edge of the bed, journal closed on her lap. She watched me pull a folding chair from the corner. "You read it," she said. "Page 43. She nodded, not with satisfaction, with the resignation of someone who has explained something many times. "You want to know how?" She opened the journal and held it flat. The current entry, Thursday, October 13th, was filled with her meticulous handwriting. She turned to Friday, also filled in. Saturday, filled in. She kept turning. Every page, all the way to the end, was filled with that same small, even script. "I don't write them," she said. "I copy them. The pages fill in overnight. Faint text, like someone pressed hard on a page that used to be on top of this one. I just trace over what's already there." Under the fluorescent light, I could see it. On the pages she hadn't traced, dated weeks, months from now, faint indentations in the paper. The ghost of handwriting pressed through from a page that wasn't there. I turned to the last entry, September 19th, 2012, 11 months from now. It was formatted like a newspaper obituary. Harold Vincent Keene, 56, of Edina, Minnesota. Dr. Keene, a forensic psychiatrist, passed on September 19, 2012. Cause of death, voluntary cessation. He is survived by his wife, Carol, and his daughter, Emma. Dr. Keene was a graduate of the University of Minnesota Medical School and served for 28 years in the Hennepin County Behavioral Health System. Attending physician, Dr. Elise Calloway. My middle name is Vincent. My wife's name is Carol. My daughter's name is Emma. I graduated from the University of Minnesota. None of this was in my credentials file at Hillcrest. None of it was accessible to a 17-year-old on a 72-hour hold. "Voluntary cessation," I said. My voice was level, clinical. The way you speak when the room is going thin again and you need something solid to hold on to. "That's not a standard cause of death." "No," Elise said. "It's not." "You're 17, you're not a doctor." She looked at me, direct. No defiance, no amusement, just patience. "Not yet," she said. I closed the journal. I placed it on the bedside table. I stood up. The folding chair scraped against the floor, and the sound went through me like a current. "Dr. Keene," her voice was quiet, "you're going to retire, before March. You're going to tell yourself it's because you're tired. That's not why." I walked out of room 4. I wrote a discharge recommendation that afternoon. Adjustment disorder resolved. No further hold criteria met. I documented that the patient's thought content, while unusual, did not meet criteria for psychotic disorder. I recommended outpatient follow-up. Elise Calloway was discharged Saturday, October 15th. Her mother picked her up. Routine paperwork. I signed it. I retired 4 months later. February, not March. I told myself that mattered, that the journal said March, and I'd left in February, so the journal was wrong. I'm in my study now. The recorder is running. 2 years since Hillcrest. Last week, I looked up Elise Calloway on the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice website. No listing, not registered, not pending, nowhere in the system. I checked again this morning. The listing appeared. Board-certified psychiatrist, licensed in Minnesota, medical degree conferred. And this is the part where my hands stop being steady. Graduation year, 2012. The same year on the obituary page. The degree was conferred from the University of Minnesota. My school. I don't know what voluntary cessation means. That's not a clinical term I've ever used. It's not in the DSM. It's not in any diagnostic manual I've read in 28 years of practice. But I've been checking the date on my phone every 20 minutes since October 2011. Not because I forget what day it is, because I'm not sure the day I'm living is the day that's supposed to be happening. And some mornings, when I pick up my phone, the screen takes a moment to load the date, and in that half second of blankness, I think, what if it already says September 19th, and the phone is just being kind by showing me something else? The recorder is still running. I don't remember how long I've been talking. I'm going to check the date now. I'm going to